You did?
All right, call the February 22nd, 2018 meeting of the AMATS Policy Committee. Order, it is 1:29, sorry, a little bit early. Let's do a roll call. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Schutte?
Here.
Ms. Heil?
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. Craig, will you be presenting public information announcement?
Oh, Mr. Schutte present that today.
Sorry?
Nice try.
I was just saying my spokesmodel will present it, my stunt double will present it, but no. AMATS meetings are all open to the public, and the public is invited to comment. If we have a business item, we'll have presentation by staff or a consultant. The committee will be then given a chance to discuss it, and then at that point, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. Do we have an approved agenda?
Move to approve?
Second.
Okay, moved by Cindy and seconded by Chris. Do we have any changes?
Shooty. Good point. There's two Chris's.
Sorry.
Constant.
Chris Schutte, sorry. Getting too informative. My bad. Are there any objections? Are there any objections to adopting the agenda? The agenda is approved. I can see I leave for one meeting and then completed. Okay, we have before us the meeting from January 25th, 2018 for approval. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Any changes or discussion? Seeing none, any objections to approving the minutes? Hearing none, the January 25th meeting minutes are approved. Moving on to agenda item 5A, performance measures targeting setting procedures and memorandum of understanding. Craig?
Here you go. So the MAP 21 and the FAST Act, which were two of the authorization bills, the federal highway authorization bills, you get those usually on a 5-year basis, but sometimes on a shorter basis. But in any case, those two updates to the Federal Highway Authorization Fund instituted the need for performance-based planning. Basically, instead of just us deciding this project will take care of certain issues, you have some performance measures that you track, and you use it to make sure that what you're doing is meeting those performance measures. They set 3 different performance measures that DOT will be responsible for, and therefore the MPOs. One was on safety targets, one was on the bridge and pavement condition, and one on travel time. There's an additional one that transit has to do, at least one additional one that I know of, which is the transit asset management. But the ones we're talking about related to us would be those 3 that I mentioned: safety, bridge and pavement, and travel time. And what we're required to do is have an agreement between the state and the metropolitan planning organizations in the states in regards to how we're going to fulfill those requirements. And so what we have before us today is an MOU between DOT and the MPOs, AMATS and FMATS, in that regard. We have a set of procedures that are listed here, and then we have these agreements here. They need to be approved by the end of May, so we do have a little bit of time, but we also need to have some sort of response to them today, basically saying, yeah, we're kind of okay with this, and we'll approve these soon, and we'll go from there. So, what did I miss on that, Aaron? That's about it? Okay.
So I have one question on this. Under the performance planning target setting procedures, which is this going to be an attachment to the MOU?
Aaron, I'm sorry, I
They're
don't.
two separate agreements, really.
Yeah.
If you'll notice, they both have signature pages, so AMATS will be signing both of them. So they're kind of two separate things.
So I guess what I'm looking at is the last item, which is on the page before the signatures, which says FEO will be responsible for the following: notify the DOT if they choose to use their own performance or condition data, if they choose to start collecting data in response to the federal performance management requirements. So is this a pretty big out? I mean, what does signing this actually mean? If you can basically just notify the other part of it, you're not going to use the performance data that I believe we're agreeing on here. Or am I missing something in this?
So we have to have this agreement between the state, and that's just an agreement, how we're gonna share data and how we're gonna track this data. This, I mean, we'll set targets every year, but this is just kind of a general overall agreement on how we're gonna work together on that. I don't.
Can I ask a clarifying question that might actually feed into yours because it's along the same lines? And we've looked at this and asked a similar question, which is if the MPO were to choose to develop its own targets for any of the measures, I don't believe that necessarily is an out. I think what it means is it is a complementary effort. And if you look at the top of the previous page, and we don't have numbers, but the top of the previous page, item B, which is a continuation of the sharing of transportation performance data, it talks about a requirement to provide that supplemental data to you guys, to DOT. So unless I'm understanding this incorrectly, Aaron or Craig, should an MPO choose to adopt its own performance measures in any of these categories, it doesn't preclude you guys from having to do it. It just means that we're going to feed the data to you rather than you will generate it. Is that a correct paraphrase of it?
I mean, basically what this is saying is that you have two options: set your own targets or support the state in their target setting. If you set your own targets, you have to notify the state that you're setting your own targets, and then you have to have the state, you have to give the data to the state to have them option to review it. Just like the state has to give the MPO the data that they're using for their target setting for a chance for you guys to review it, for staff to review it. So that's all it's saying is that.
Can you play that scenario out more? So if the MPO chooses to adopt its own target data and it provides that data to DOT, does DOT approve that data, or does DOT simply pass that through to the feds?
No, there's no real passing through to the Fed. So the MPO targets are kind of funny because the state sets their targets and they have to report those to the feds on a specific annual basis or semi-annual or whatever. The MPOs only have to report their information to the state, and then the state has to keep that information in case the feds come through and say, hey, we want to see the MPO targets or what the MPO is doing to help support the targets. There's no actual reporting requirement to FHWA for these outside of the MTP. The MTP has its own little reporting requirements. Basically, that's a system performance report saying, how's your system doing in relation to the targets that you set or the targets that you're supporting for the state. It's really confusing. Some of the information we may not know right now just because this is a first for us, and even FHWA still doesn't have 100% clear information what they want, especially relating to the MTP and the system performance report. That's a little gray area, unfortunately.
So one question here, now I probably should know the answer to this, but does the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities collect the data for the Anchorage Bowl regardless of what the MPO does?
The MPO, so Municipality of Anchorage collects its own data, and then the state collects its own data,
Okay.
but it's on a national highway system, the state-owned roads, whereas the municipality collects it for local roads and stuff. And as you'll notice, the safety targets require all public roads need to be accounted for in the target setting. So a lot of it is sharing of data between the two to be able to get the target information set.
Okay, just one clarification, just so everybody understands. So this is an agreement between AMATS, FMATS, and the state.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, why were those two selected only? Aren't there others in the region, or is it just Fairbanks and Anchorage that have an MPO?
There's only two.
Okay, and so just so I understand as clearly as I can, this kind of moving machine that we have, if we adopt the state's performance measures as what we're going to account for, then we can adopt our own simultaneously. We just have to report them, or we are bound only to collect what the state has required.
We have two options. We can either adopt theirs or set our own. So we wouldn't adopt theirs and then set our own as well and track our own. We'll do one or the other.
And if I can ask a follow-up, well, I think this is where you're going to go because we're both named Chris, and I think we think similarly. We don't need to make that decision right now.
So we do need to make that decision right now on the safety measures, which is item B. That we don't, for the agreement.
To execute the agreement, though, we don't need to make that decision right now on all of the
No,
performance.
that's correct.
Thank you.
Correct. Yeah.
Other questions? Mr. Wilkie?
I have a couple, where does it say all public roads in here? Is that in our document?
That's under the safety targets specifically, so it's not part of the.
Okay, there in
next item.
5D, okay. So, okay, so a couple of things. One, aren't we sharing the data already?
I believe so.
So this is, we're already doing this, right?
I mean, as far as I know.
Okay. And then if it's all public roads, this is between MPO, FMATS, and the state, but we got public transits and the buses. And so the city should be signing this too. I mean, and all public roads, I mean, a lot of the roads are city roads.
Sure.
Good question, John, and we've had an internal discussion about that as well. And I think where we landed is that because the MPO is made up of the city, namely this seat that I'm sitting in, that the public transit voice is considered part of the agreement already. But I do see where you're going with that and whether or not public transit should be considered as an additional signatory to the agreements. And I don't have a particularly strong feeling one way or the other, but I do believe that that transit, this all roads question, transit is represented through the MPO.
Well, I wouldn't say transit needs to have its own signing line so much, but the city should.
Right.
Because so many of our roads are cities. I mean, you are sitting here as part of the, but we don't speak as the assembly, we sit as members, you know. I mean, it just seems odd that there isn't a line there
For the
that
executive.
you or the mayor can sign.
Right.
Well, if you look at on the performance planning target setting right there, the language is right there where it says the MPO state and providers of public transportation. So the agreement is between the MPOs and the states
Right.
too. You have to the state has to set performance targets and the MPO does. It doesn't say that those individual cities are. If you have a city the size of Houston or Wasilla or whatever, which is clearly smaller than 50,000,
Right.
and is not an MPO, they're going to be under the umbrella of the state because those roads are, you know,
Right.
if they're state owned, they're going to be, those targets are going to be measured based on that. But it's, you know, we are in an MPO, and so we're part of this cooperative entity, which is AMATS, which is the city and the state together. So
And providers of public transportation.
Right.
And that's the city. And then we may have different, I mean, Vision Zero, does that apply to, we want that citywide, but are we applying any policies that spring from that to state roads? I mean, so
Dave and I were just talking about that.
that's a yes?
Aaron, do you want to respond to that?
Not really, but the state's doing its own thing and has been for quite some time now of going towards zero deaths. So
Wait, hope so.
it's not like suddenly adopting Vision Zero is gonna change anything.
Let me ask a follow-up then that actually gives it a little bit more nuance than just that is, you know, whether or not you're doing it. Dave and I were talking earlier about some of the safety targets that have been set on a statewide basis and what happens if, as a city, you don't agree with those. You have separate targets, Vision Zero being, you know, zero deaths, pedestrian deaths or injuries. And do you necessarily, as an MPO, by signing on to the statewide target, limit yourself in setting your own targets, which is kind of the line of questioning I was trying to go down and asking about MPOs that choose to develop their own targets, their own performance measures, and what we need to report back to the state or to the feds. So it's not I don't think it's a matter of, you know, who's doing it. It's if the city chose to adopt its own safety targets. I guess it's kind of a question for Aaron. I'll put it in the form of a question for Aaron. If the city were to choose to adopt its own safety targets, and one of those safety targets was to go for zero for the like whatever the line says, the bottom line, the pedestrian focused line on the fatalities or accidents, we would be responsible then for measuring and reporting that. Is that correct?
No,
No.
this is only between the state and the MPO, so the city has if you set your targets for whatever you want, you're not required to set targets for the safety or any of the other measures.
I'm referring to the MPO. If the MPO
Okay, that's a
set
little
a target-
different. So if the MPO sets its targets and you say, hey, we want to go ahead and set our own targets, then yes, you are responsible for making sure you have the data to be able to show for safety, for example, the 5-year rolling average to support whatever you select, and you're required to report that to the Department of Transportation. And that's what this agreement is for, is saying, okay, you have two options, and either one that, whatever you choose, here's what you're supposed to do to follow those procedures. It's a lot easier to just support the state in their targets, but we, account for, if you want to develop your own, here's kind of the process you have to follow to do that.
So, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Then that actually squeezes back to Mr. Weddleton's question of if public transportation or the city wants to have a voice in this question, shouldn't they be a signatory? Right, because it says it right there that public transportation, MPO, state. The assumption I heard was, well, the city is signing on by virtue of the mayor, but that's not in fact the case, right? Because we're just here as part of the MPO.
Well, so recently,
Well,
Cindy's-
before you get to, remember, these are federal rules. There are hundreds of MPOs that cross jurisdictional boundaries, and you have different flavors, and they don't want to deal with meetings. They need to deal with the MPOs because you could have you'll never go into these now if you have 7 different communities within an MPO signing all these things with their own decisions. So you just kind of back up a little bit, and I think it's just saying procedures. And then once you get to the performances, once you get to the side, the details, that's when you can decide as a local MPO to take more into account the local issues, that then you'd set your own performance measures at that point. I mean, I think there's ways to deal with that.
So am I correct in understanding though, if we opt to do that, then we can't opt to just follow the state?
One choice or the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
AMATS is unique, as far as I can tell. It's
Yeah.
one of very few, if not the only MPO that has just one local government. I mean, even Fairbanks has the, City of Fairbanks and Fairbanks North Star Borough.
And I,
And the
for one,
city-
am very
city North
grateful
Pole.
for that.
And
What's that? And City of North Pole, right,
So there's
so
3 jurisdictionals in
Mhm.
Fairbanks MPO.
And it's,
Most of them, I
More
mean,
challenging.
Chicago's got 28, 60, 70, 80 towns in there inside their MPO, so we're fortunate in many ways, I
So-
think.
sorry.
So where's the railroad fit in this? That's transportation.
But we don't use our federal funding on the railroad.
We do, they take
Not-
our.
Different,
for
not
the
that
same
much.
amount.
application.
Not AMATS.
That's not
AMATS
AMATS.
funding. So that's what you have to also remember is performance measures on the money that you're spending through the AMATS MPO.
So a
Federal dollars.
city road that's not using federal money that isn't part of this, public transit is federal money. So it should be.
Different federal.
And you're saying
But
it's,
they're taking transit as being representative by the people on this committee and on the TAC. The MPO is multiple levels, and that they're representative.
okay. So we got that, deadline end of May.
One last question on that topic then. So separate from the MPO, the city could in fact adopt its own policies regarding Vision Zero, wanting to measure how they get there. There's no question there, right?
No, absolutely.
Okay, so then that, I guess, just kind of gives a clear dividing line between responsibilities.
Okay, any other?
What other, and this is, I guess it's page 2, so 3B3 and 3B and 3E talk about communications by resolution and meeting minutes. And can we specify that's from the policy committee? I mean, in our email exchange, I think you said that's how it's done, right? Because this could be any meeting. This could be the TAC or it could be any group.
Specify whatever you want, sure.
Citizens advisory.
Well, does that make sense? So, say that ultimately the final agreement on.
Well, I guess in my view, if it's an MPO that's recording a resolution, there's only one resolution. that
Just
ever
to
comes out of
clarify, John, is
AMATS.
that, are you trying to state that this clause in the form of a resolution or meeting minutes doesn't specify that resolution or meeting needs to be the policy committee?
Yeah, I'd like it to, so say in the form of a resolution or meeting minutes of the policy committee. Something like that.
I think it goes without
Did you get
saying,
that
I
down?
think it goes without saying to me, but we can wordsmith it if you want.
It did go without saying, I want to say.
But then you said it. I mean, it's an MPO, it's the MPO's resolution or meeting minutes, and well, the only decider is the policy committee, everyone else is advisory, so.
Well, then a follow-up question to clarify. If John is going to make a motion to amend this to include that kind of phrase in that clause, should it specify the policy committee, Craig or Aaron, or should it just say the MPO? Aaron shaking his head no.
So honestly, this is for both MPOs that exist in this state. This is not just for you, this
Yeah.
MPO. So each MPO may want to do it a different way. So to sit there and say it's only for the policy committee resolution, well, if FMATS wants to do it a different way, then we have some kind of conflict here. So leaving it generic
Would it
and
be safe to
saying,
say the MPO rather than the policy committee?
I mean, if you want to say MPO resolution, that's fine.
John, is that?
That sounds better, actually, yeah.
I don't see a problem with that one. Just so you know, when you decide to set targets or support the state, it's not bound in stone. It changes depending on when you have to report on those targets. So for example, safety is a yearly thing. So every year you have to decide whether you're going to be supporting the state's targets or setting your own. So it's not the end of the world if you guys support the state for a year until you can catch up to what you want to do and then decide to change your mind the next year and set your own targets.
Can you play that out to the end? So let's imagine that John wants to radically change the way we measure safety in the MPO here. When would he do that? And how?
Well, honestly, for safety, for example, it's a yearly thing. So right now, the safety targets are being looked at for the state for 2019, because 2018 is already set, as you'll see in item B. So if you wanted to radically change it and say, we want to set our own targets, well, you'd start basically at the beginning of the calendar year and start looking at what data you have, what you can actually show, and then what you want to do with it, and then kind of make a decision by, it's generally February of the following year. So for the 2018 targets, you have until February of 2018 to decide what you want to do. It's really weird, I know, but this is just how the federal law is played out.
So that would be decided by February of 2019 to take effect in 2020.
In 2019.
Wow.
That's
I like
what he
that.
just
And then you can
Reported in 20.
And
report it in 20.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's what I was
Yeah.
saying.
So question here, Aaron, the MOU is between AMATS, FMATS, and
State.
the Department of Transportation. This just has signatories.
I didn't make a copy of the FMAS page.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, so if we're making changes here, FMATS is going to have to look at that and agree to what we're changing before they sign
And
it.
DOT has to
So,
agree too.
yes, all parties will have to agree to any changes you recommend.
So, and again, it's due the end of May, so
right,
if we have changes to make, we would need to make them now and report back to the state, and they can contact FMATS and say, hey, here are the little tweaks they made, are you okay with that?
so just going back just for a second to John's, Mr. Weddleton's question here, doesn't the fact that this is an agreement between AMATS and the state and FMATS, the policy committee is the representative of AMATS? Why would we have to put MPO in there? Or am I missing something here?
I mean, you wouldn't.
Services call something different in Fairbanks maybe.
There's the policy committee also.
Oh, so it doesn't matter.
But ultimately,
But
it's
they
the
may
same
decide
thing.
they don't want to have it by policy committee resolution, they can decide some other resolution. I don't know what they might want.
Oh.
Well, let me see, Dave, are you saying why make the change at all? Or are you
Well,
saying-
I'm just wondering, yeah.
It just seemed more clear to me because there's lots of different groups that meet on a whole variety of things that are part of the AMATS umbrella.
Sure.
So who makes a decision? And we've seen here that the TAC makes really significant decisions, and if we go against that, we have to go through a whole public process for months and months. And I'm very now skittish about saying anything because, so I want to make it clear in here, because if a decision were made at the TAC that these are our goals, and then here we say we'd like to add one, and all of a sudden it goes back to public process for months.
Did I
Say
hear
we
you
get to
say we
decide.
skittish?
I heard it.
I heard it.
Because I think that might be a bit of a stretch.
Well, and I would like to say, well, I've got the floor. Thank you, Aaron, for not answering the question of how John would do it. Thank you for not saying at the last minute.
I have a question on a slightly different topic, but on the document. So this is an agreement between the department, AMATS, and FMATS, but we have never spoken with FMATS. And we're now entering into an agreement with them. What's the procedure for liaising with them, right? Because, you know, I don't understand how that works. Because it's not just an agreement between them and the state and us and the state. It's an agreement between them and the state, us and them.
So I don't think, maybe Aaron can clarify this, but we talked about this yesterday. This really is an agreement between FMATS, AMATS, and the state. It's not an agreement between FMATS. I mean, there's nothing in here that I have seen that says if AMATS does this, AMATS, or FMATS does this, AMATS has got to do this, or vice versa. It's not a,
Except we just heard if you change one word of this thing, we have to then go to them.
well,
It has to go to them.
Right, but
Well,
again,
it's probably
that's,
gonna go to the state, and the state will be the one who
Yeah.
organizes it, because really it's between the state and the MPOs.
Has FMET's already executed their version?
they
Dave or
can't.
Aaron?
No, they're waiting for your guys' comments, and they've been waiting for 3 months now. So that's why we're kind of pushing this to try and get in. And DOT headquarters is waiting for your guys' comments on this before they do any kind of execution of the agreement.
And just for clarification here, Aaron, we want, or we would like, one single document. Obviously, if they're all three going to sign, it's got to be the same document, so that's what
We
we're trying to get
have
to.
different signatory pages. One for FMATS, because it's between FMATS and the state, and then one for AMATS, it's between AMATS and the state. It's not between AMATS and FMATS.
Okay, any more questions from the committee?
If they're waiting, if they've been waiting for 3 months, why are we just not getting it?
Well, the person who was handling it was Teresa,
Oh,
so it just got,
fell through the cracks. Gotcha.
I thought it was because of the changing of the review criteria. We had to
Yeah,
wait.
we can blame John.
Yeah,
John's fault.
Okay, you guys are getting out of control now. Any comments from the public? Yes, sir.
Abdul Hassan, Public Transportation Director. My understanding, at least in conversation with the FDA, is that we are required to, and as we've diligently been doing so, come up with a transit asset management plan because of our federal vesture in capital assets, both equipment and facilities. As far as I understand it from Region 10 of the FTA, AMATS, the MPO, is supposed to adopt the criteria that we push forward. I just wanted to make sure that that is in sync with the conversation we're having here, because I am not comfortable presently, sort of listening to what I have, that is in sync. Fundamentally, what we've been instructed by the FTA is that the criteria that you come up with must be adopted by the MPO. And yes, we are part of the MPO, but we're also not part of the MPO, depending on which setting we're in. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then I can work with Region 10 to be able to get a statement to that effect, but to me, given that public transportation is outlined there, would indicate that we have criteria sets that need to be adopted. And I just want to make sure that we're not precluded from doing so.
Any other? Yes, ma'am.
I had a question. I'm sorry I came in late. I wasn't quite clear. Did I understand, when I read this, it seems different, but I thought I heard you folks say that you can have your DOT performance criteria and you can have MPO, but you have to choose somehow, that there's a division. You can't have both.
Aaron, can you clarify?
if you look at, if you go look at item 5B, right in the front, it says MPOs have two options when setting their own targets for each measure. So there are three different measures that we're required to set for. There's bridge of payment, travel time, and safety. We can choose to set our own targets, or we can agree to support the state's targets.
We can't
Those are
do
the
both.
options.
We
Those are,
cannot.
those are the options.
Can you say your name?
My name is Cheryl Richardson. We cannot do both. We cannot endorse the state and have additional targets of our own.
It says they have two options when setting their own targets for each measure. They can establish a numerical target for each performance measure specific to the MPO planning area, or we can agree to support the state's targets.
That's for these federally required.
Right.
If you're talking about additional performance targets for other things, that's a separate not related to this. This is just for the federally required performance measures and targets that came out of MAP 21 and the FAST Act.
Thank you. And this document does not determine that process, correct? Or I've got the wrong document apparently, because I don't have 5B.
It does determine the process for the federally required performance targets and measures, but not the other
It
ones.
says that we will, does this document say that this MPO chooses to follow the state performance targets? That is yet to be determined.
That's determined on a measure-by-measure basis.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, what is the will of the committee?
I'd like to move an amendment, or approve it, move to approve.
Okay.
Second,
I'd like to amend in both 3B.3 and also 3E, after the phrase resolution or meeting minutes, add of the MPO.
I'm sorry, John, could you say that one more time?
Sure. Looking at 3, this is the section on reporting of performance targets and data, so 3B.3 says resolution or meeting minutes. Change that to read resolution or meeting minutes of the MPO. And likewise in E, it should say, change where it says resolution, comma, meeting minutes, change that to resolution or meeting minutes of the MPO or system performance report. And basically, just to clarify, it's the MPO.
Second.
here, it says, the form of resolution and of the MPO,
Okay.
and then down here, it says, resolution or meeting minutes of the MPO. Right, or meeting minutes of the MPO.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I seconded that.
Discussion? Okay, so we have an amendment to be voted on. Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes to add to 3B3 of the MPO after, or minutes of the MPO, and then on 3E after meeting minutes of the MPO.
Actually, change it to resolution or meeting minutes. Get rid of the comma, essentially.
Delete the comma after resolution and add the word or.
Okay, so it's, 3E is in the form of a resolution or meeting minutes of the MPO or system performance report, correct?
Correct, thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we have the amendment.
That has the amendment.
That was the amendment. Okay, so now we have the original motion. So what is the will of the committee?
It's already been moved and seconded.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I would just have a brief comment that on the first line of the preamble language there, on the performance planning page, where it states, MPO states, and the providers of public transportation. I just want to affirm what I heard from the municipal transit director, that it does look like there's a third party there, and we've heard really clear testimony that the MPO is not Anchorage, right? It's a joint body between Anchorage and the state. There's the state, and then there are providers of public transportation. So going forward, and I'm not going to ask that we change this or do anything, I just want us to all recognize in the process moving forward that this document does say there, at least to my reading, is a third party there. And so we need to be cognizant of that and address it. What are you saying?
State, AMATS, AMATS.
Right, F for the MPOs though. So there are MPOs, the state, and Fairbanks probably has their own public transportation people as well. So anyhow, I just want to make sure that's really clearly on the record in the motion, not in the motion, in the discussion, that it does appear to be that there are other parties than the signatories.
Okay, so are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay, agenda item 5B, safety target setting performance measures. Craig?
Yeah, so this would be the first of the safety targets that were, the safety of the targets that we're going to set. And so they're in the safety area, and we had a lot of discussions earlier this year where myself and Teresa Brewer and Ken Carpenter, who's with the municipal traffic data section, and Aaron, among others, they're all participants are listed on the back page, where we met together to talk about the safety targets. And so we work with them to help them set these targets. And our suggestion this year, staff's suggestion this year, is to agree to the state's targets. And they're listed there on the front of the memo, as well as in the memo from DOT here, the 2-page memo. And so this year, we're suggesting that we go along with the state's targets. And again, these are statewide targets. So we're agreeing to that for now. If we decide in the following years, at some point, that we want to set our own for our MPO, we can do that for the MPO boundaries themselves, but right now, that's what we're looking to suggest, and the TAC recommended 2 weeks ago to agree to that.
Question? Mr.
I think for Aaron probably. So, because I'm new to this is an annual process that the MPO goes through?
It's an annual process that the state and the MPO will have to go through.
Okay,
yes.
sorry, that the state and the MPO go through. And are we late on this one too?
No.
Okay.
You guys are, well, you're at the nth minute, so they're due by February of 2018, end of February 2018.
Okay.
So,
And real quick, because I'm not familiar with previous year's targets, as you look down the list on fatalities, fatality rates, serious injuries, non-motorized, et cetera, which I understand that's a relatively new one, what was the 2017 target for each of those? And are we going up, down?
so there were no targets per se beforehand. This is the first kind of
This
iteration.
is a
of-
new one, okay.
Yeah, so these are
I
all
thought
brand
3 of them
new.
existed before.
I mean,
Isn't that what you said, Shrek?
Well, the
we've
numbers
reported on
exist.
some of it,
They-
yeah. We've reported on, the state's reported on this kind of stuff before. I don't have the data in front of me to tell you what it was in previous years.
But they haven't had to set targets before.
Yeah, they haven't targets per
It's the first
se.
time we've had to set
Yeah,
targets.
I can, as part of this development of these targets, that information was provided, so we can forward that on. I can find it and forward it on to Craig and get it to you guys so you can see where what the 5-year rolling average looks like, because it'll have each year and what it was at.
So I can, sorry.
Let me just close out with this thought. Can you at least make me feel comfortable that with the research you did at the 5-year rolling average, that the numbers you put in here as targets are below that average? So that we're shooting to go lower?
So,
I have a nod in the back of the room. I hope you say yes.
I mean, one of the things you have to realize, unfortunately, is that you have to kind of look at the data and see what it's telling you. So I believe these ones are below what we have for the 5-year rolling average. However,
Perfect.
keep in mind that if the 5-year rolling average is going up, then your targets need to reflect that as well. So you don't want to say, okay, our 5-year average is going up, so we're going to set it as low as possible.
Sure.
Because you're not going to achieve it, and then you're going to run into problems. This is for the state. The MPO doesn't really have problems if they don't achieve it.
Thank you.
So I can add in just a little bit to this. I just gave a presentation down in Juneau on this. And serious injuries, even though the population of Alaska has been going up since 1977, serious injuries have been going down significantly statewide. And fatalities have been fairly level, but when you consider that the population has gone up considerably since then, that's, per 100 million miles, that would be going down, but those are just raw numbers. So we have made significant, and especially with the safety corridors, which we have 3 in the central region. Thank you. Any other, yes, sir?
I have a question following what Aaron just said. You said the repercussions if we don't meet the targets. What are the repercussions?
For the MPO, there are no repercussions. The federal legislation came out and basically set to where the state DOTs are the only ones who have repercussions for not meeting their targets. And that tends to be a reallocation of funding to meet those targets. So if you don't meet your HSIP targets, then it's reallocating of some of the funding to HSIP to start doing that. It's up to the state and the MPOs to decide if there are repercussions if you don't meet your targets. And at this time, the state has said, we have no interest in making there be repercussions if you guys don't meet your targets, because it doesn't benefit anyone. Sorry if that's confusing,
Well,
but
that's perfect, actually. Thanks.
So just to add to this discussion a little bit, there's the four components here, and I mean, needs some help with this: engineering, education, emergency response, and
It's enforcement.
enforcement, right. And my safety folks tell me that those four are about equally divided as far as how much, results you get from spending money on one of those, as far as reductions in serious injuries. Any other comments or questions? Yes,
Yeah, thank you. The date on this document is March the 6th, 2017. So is it standard then that in a couple weeks, this process will occur again for the next year?
yes.
So does it take a year for us to see this report, or can we see a copy of it sooner? So we can kind of get a sense of where the state's going?
I mean, that's up to Craig. The AMAT staff was involved from the very beginning on the development of all this.
I did not get this on March 7th, 2017.
Right, I
got this
assume that's true.
About 3 weeks ago.
Right,
You
which
can
it
see
just
the
seems.
timeline on the back. There's a timeline. So in July, they get the HSP. In August, they do the HSIP annual reports, which will be what would probably feed into this. Because they have to have, these things are built on other reports and data collection. So I would assume, given the things like we do, 2017 data has to be QA, QC, the reports built up, and then all that kind of stuff. So it's probably likely you won't see the next till the fall. And then by the time they're trying to get it all done by February, yeah, it could have been probably done by the end of the year, but
Yeah, just, it's an odd time lag to me. I don't know.
So one of the challenges we have in Alaska is we have a lot of rural communities, and it's challenging to get data from, like if someone was injured or killed or whatever, that sometimes is problematic getting that information. So a lot of the time that goes into this is spent figuring out, was this a, vehicle accident? What was this? So it's a little more challenging in Alaska than it is in some other places. Any other questions from the committee? Questions from the public? Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I don't see how, I'm trying to understand how this relates to Anchorage's setting its own safety standards, because this is a statewide count, correct? And we'll go through a different process to set our own safety standards? Performance standards?
Again, we have two choices. We can adopt the states, which is what we're suggesting, or we can set our own. Our thought is, for this first year, until we exactly figure out how these are gonna suss out, our suggestion is to agree with the states. At some point in the future, we may decide we will try and set our own, just using the data from inside the MPO, but right now, we're not set up in a short period of time to figure out how to extrapolate the data just for us and work on that. But we could do that in the future.
Can I add a follow-up question then, Craig? Or a clarification, request for clarification? Earlier, maybe it was Aaron who said this, or maybe it was you, but there's nothing that precludes the city, separate from the MPO and separate from the state, nothing that precludes the city from saying, our goal is to have 0 pedestrian deaths. And we can set up our own performance measures, our own policies to achieve that. It is separate and distinct from this, but it does not preclude the city from independently acting. Is that correct? Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
I don't know, did we actually vote on the item to change our taxing, or is that at the next meeting for the highway?
Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. So, the municipality is looking at coming up with a new way of funding enforcement and safety out on the highway. And the highway is one of those safety corridors. And the question that I have is, are AMATS funds available, safety funds, for some enforcement out there? Because I just heard enforcement was one of those 5 planks. And, because, we're looking at a hole between the state's revenues and the city's revenues and the need, clear need, because it's a safety corridor.
Comment on that. We couldn't use MPO money because that's not the MPO either. It would have to be state money.
Oh, it's not
Are
an
we talking
MPO?
about the Seward Highway?
Yeah,
South of
Between here and Girdwood?
that's outside of the MPO.
Yeah, the MPO's boundaries stop at Potter Marsh.
Hey, excuse me. Yeah, thank you.
So we get to use state money though. That's even better.
You guys are all out of order. Okay, what is the will of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion is approved.
Who seconded it? Sorry.
You did.
Okay, agenda item 5C, the 2015-2018 Transportation Improvement Program, admin modification number 17. Right?
Okay, so this is, we're trying to do is just reflect a few relatively minor changes. To have some increases in cost, plus we have a small increase in the AMATS allocation. So we'll go into those detail. Basically, in Table 3, we had to reflect the correct termini for the Abbott Road Phase 2 project. It was supposed to say Elmore to Birch. What did it say before?
Said Jupiter to Birch.
Jupiter to Birch. So it's just a little bit different. You would know your area.
Well, maybe finish, then I have a comment on that.
And in addition, we had some increased funds for that project due to utility undergrounding. That's Table 3. Want to ask or clarify that, sir?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that changed. I think that's probably important that we all kind of knew what was going on. But the real issue there is we would like to move the project 20 feet east of Birch, because the real problem there is when you're hitting Birch and Abbott, you can't see up the hill because you have a revetment there. And that was originally when they scoped the project, they drew the line right at Birch, so they say, well, we can't spend money outside. How hard is it to, at this point, add 50
Impossible.
feet? Simply impossible.
It's impossible, yeah. Because you have an environmental document that was done that set the limits, and if you start going beyond that, then you have to start the process all over again. And so
Be
the,
warned in the future, make that.
yeah,
Like we did, I think phase 1 went past. But I guess I'm looking at Diamond, went to Livingston, or O'Malley, went to Livingston, and then, we kind of did it that way, went through the major intersections. Okay, thanks.
Craig, are you done with your presentation?
I just was mentioning Table 3.
Okay.
We're gonna go Table 4 is just, there's some increases in the cost estimate for the bike plan project implementation and area trails. And then in the TAP funds, the Table 4A, it changes, a couple changes in cost and schedule for the West Cheshire Lagoon Trail Rehab, Chugash Foothills Connector Phase 2, and the Mountain View Drive Pathway Reconstruction. So minor changes. These are of the level that requires a policy committee approval. So we've been 2 weeks ago at the TAC, and they recommended that you approve this.
Is there any other questions? Yes, Mr. Wilson.
I assume the units here are thousands? Right.
Yep.
Bike plan implementation, some cost went up $1.4 million.
That's the total cost. It was 930,000. It's up to 1.4.
So I actually had a similar question, and I kind of made the assumption, maybe in the future, I don't know if it's how it's done or not, but we show a change, right? Like the delta between what was and what is being proposed.
On the table itself or on this?
Either one, just so that when you say a minor change, I looked at it and I thought, $14 million, that's a lot, or 1.4 million, or $4 million. But then I realized that doesn't make sense. It's only some fraction of that difference, but I couldn't tell what the change is.
So what we try to do on the memo is show, you have the current tip, which shows bike plan implementation of 931,000. And then this recommended change is up to 1.4
And I
million.
was reading through this, I actually didn't see the memo. Thank you.
Yeah, we used to just give you this, and it was confusing to me. So this, DOT started this a while ago, and it really helps to clarify. You can see, typically changes are in red, and the bottom half is the change.
Okay, any other questions from the, yes, sir.
Just the process, so were the, I guess the bike and trails thing, did that go through the bike ped advisory committee?
I believe so, but this is when we took it to them just recently, they're just advisory, so they looked at it, I believe. Oftentimes, if it's a minor it's an administrative modification, we don't take them through the bodies just in terms of getting things done in time. Because these meetings are quarterly, those advisory committees. If it's a bigger change, then yeah. But I think this one went there.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions from the committee?
I missed a recent meeting of the big pack, so I wasn't positive.
Tim, are you still on that?
Yes.
I really don't recall that coming up. I don't think anyone would have objected to spending more money on the bike.
Okay, any further questions from the committee? Okay.
Can I just, for the record, you should state your name, sorry,
Jim Sednar.
on the, he's on the bike ped advisory.
Thank you, John. Any other, go ahead.
Just one more, and Craig, I apologize if you did cover this and I was doing math in my head and didn't hear it. The change on the Spenard Road reconstruction, I'm sorry, what was the reason for that?
So it was originally in 2018 to start the design on that, and
Okay.
I think my understanding is they're just pushing it out to 19.
Just pushing it,
If
okay.
you look in the tip, it shows in 19 now,
Thank you.
which is outside the fiscal constraint of this tip.
Any other comments from the committee, or questions? Any comments from the public?
There it is.
Okay, what's the will of the committee?
Move to approve?
Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, it's approved. Any action items, Craig?
That's it for action items.
Floor is open for the committee. Any comments? Anyone? From the public? Okay, thank you all.
We have one info item.
Oh.
Ms. Underwood is going to share an update on the ATP. We have some things we want you to be aware of and jump onto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Vivian Underwood with AMATS. So since the last time I was here, we posted the survey number 2 for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We've talked about issues with the public, we've talked about potential solutions, and now we're at the point where we want to start drafting alternatives, which means we want to talk about the specific road projects and bike and ped projects that we're going to model. And we'll come back to you in May. We'll bring all that together. We'll have the survey closes March 23rd. And then we expect the report, no, the survey closes March 11th. We expect the survey report on the 23rd. Mr. Lyon is going to arrange for a work session with the AMATS committees the first week of April. And then we'll come back to you all to get approval to model the final set of projects. Keep in mind that this is not everything. This is not policies. This is not action items. But it's just to look at the specific projects. Road, bike, and ped, and transit. So if you all have any comments, we would love to have those ahead of time so that we can get to work on answering them for you. And so the survey is posted. There's also a companion document, which is the link is within the survey, and this is also on the main page of the survey. It's called AMATS 2040 MTP Alternatives. It's a draft. There is a base case of projects that we would recommend be done no matter what. And those typically have to do with state of good repair or things that would help the overall system. Then we have alternative 1, which is basically continuing the way we've been going in the past, incremental changes, but also implementing the land use plan. Scenario 2 would be more like pushing envelope, doing things a little more aggressively. It's going to take new funding sources, so keep that in mind. So the survey is trying to get a sense of the public of which direction to go in. We were at the Transportation Fair on February 8th. We had really good participation. We were busy all night. I was glad that people were waiting in line to take the survey. We had iPads. It was very popular. We had 58 people, which I think was really good. So we really want your help also. We've been trying to integrate this with the land use plan. And what we're realizing is there are some institutional things that have to happen in order for us to be able to do that. And we actually will be coming to you for your help with that. There will be projects, we know there are projects, for example, that we're going to be recommending that are on transit supportive development corridors. But it doesn't make sense to say, we're gonna hold off doing everything, any project at all, until we get those implementation action items from the land use plan, to the framework for doing those studies, and those small area implementation plans, and those things that need to be in place first before we do anything in those areas. So we're going to be meeting with the long-range planning folks to see if they could provide us some guidance, some direction along those lines. And Joni Wilm is working on the Complete Streets policy. Along with that, she's going to be preparing a checklist. So I talked with her today about the viability of including on her checklist an item to make sure that anybody who's implementing a project looks to the land use plan and goes to long-range planning in the absence of any of those implementation tools to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what this project, street prison should look like, the typology. We actually already have a street typology adopted on the books, but it just hasn't been implemented yet. So.
Questions from the committee?
That just, thank you, and that's very interesting and sounds like a very valuable opportunity. My challenge would be to the department then to identify the right individual or individuals who would serve as the conduit for a review of questions related to neighborhood-specific plans, land use plan in relationship to these projects. So it's not just whoever's available on Tuesday, but it's the expert that knows the details of the issue.
You're in luck. Everybody on the department's an
Is an expert, right? So, you know what I'm saying, though? That, I think the burden shifts a little bit.
Yeah.
We're lucky man.
Question, I think, just, John, what was your role? You're AMATS now, but when you were planning, you were doing the land use plan, weren't you?
Correct, yeah.
So that's very convenient.
Yeah. And that's, Vivian and I had a discussion about this morning, so I provided some of my observations and to her about, the land use plan and how we want to better integrate the land use side with the transportation side.
That's critical. That's
It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
I know everybody would like to we all would like to get jumping on this, get it moving forward, but unfortunately, we don't want to get ahead of the land use plan, but there's got to be some mechanism in between time, in between the time when we have those corridor studies done. And we can nominate to the next tip. The nominations are due by March 2nd to do some of those items. One would be, I think it's 6-3, action item in the land use plan, to do an implementation plan for the transit supportive development corridors, and also to look at the secondary road network, which I know Mr. Wellington is very interested in. So anything like that that is of particular interest to you to implement the land use plan, any action item that is possible for AMATS to fund, I would recommend you take a look at that and get that to us
reschedule.
by March 2nd.
No, it hasn't.
So just a follow-up comment on your initial information item about the survey, which I have taken, and I don't know who put it together. Very, very well done. So whoever made that, please pass that along. The tool itself and the way that it asks the questions and presents the different underlying scenarios was intuitive and a lot of fun. So
Thank you.
hopefully you get a lot of good results.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
On that subject, maybe from the other side of the coin, the TIP nominations process, which isn't quite here, but it's kind of part of this. I have neighbors and community groups that are interested in submitting nominations. What they found with the Google document that's available to make the nominations in is that there are some very technical questions that are part of the survey that are outside of the realm of a general member of the public to answer. And this dissuaded members of the public from submitting nominations. And so I don't know if it might be wise at some point in the future to put a statement on there, fill these out to the best of your ability. But, the tool itself was a barrier to entry for people who were interested. So that's separate from the intuitive document that was developed for the other part of the process.
That's a great suggestion, because, when I do a presentation on it, I let them know, fill out the parts that you can fill out, and the average citizen is not gonna know what the average daily traffic on a corridor is. They're just not. I mean, I don't know it. I have to go look it up. So I make that statement, but that's a really good suggestion to have it on there. I'm sorry that we didn't
I've
do
been
that ahead of time.
making it clear to everybody who brings me that concern, but I imagine there are numbers of people who I just will never find, but they're gonna walk away because they're afraid. Or I have one group spend all the time to research and analyze all of those details, right? And so they answered every question. It's probably all wrong, but they spent hours doing it, so.
Why would we ask someone, in the general public, what the average daily traffic on a road? I mean, this isn't a quiz, this is
Yeah,
a...
so the nomination form matches up to the criteria, because when we rank projects and we score projects, we look at those criteria, and that's one of the things that's on there. And
But
so,
why would we, that's a fact, that's not, we don't need to have the public telling us what the ADT is.
yeah, oftentimes, I'd say the majority of the nomination forms we get are from agencies. So they're either from DOT offering something, or project management and engineering at the MOA offering something. So they have that information, they know that information.
You want them to put that information.
Either it saves
You
time.
put as
Maybe
much
we
as you
need two
can.
different types of, because I can see where that would be, this is not a form for me, because how am I gonna find that out?
Intelligent design solutions was a question on there. And I'm getting questions like, what does that even mean?
Maybe shade those. so that
Well,
it's
I think
black
what we should have done, which I'm sorry, I just didn't think about at the time, is just language at the top that says, fill it, and I thought Jamie was gonna
Yeah.
put something like that there, and we talked about that, but should have stressed that needed to be up there, fill out as much as you can, and we'll get the rest.
Unless you're an agency, don't worry about
Right.
about filling in everything, just so you have a disclaimer.
I mean, what we have to rank for every short-range project that's in the MTP right now, and then plus the ones that come in. So there could be 100 in some of them.
Yep.
So for us to fill those out, it takes a lot of time, which obviously that's what we're here to do, but it's just more time before we can then start scoring and ranking. So the more that people can fill in, the better. Your folks that that fill it all the way in, I guarantee you it's not wrong. It's all good information that we use to, do that stuff.
See,
I don't wanna get into micromanaging here, but would it be possible to have the first section for the general public? And have someone who's not an engineer, not a planner, not working here, read through them and go, yeah, these make sense to me? Because oftentimes, we tend to get pretty, this is our world, and we expect everybody to understand exactly what it is we're talking about. And as my wife reminds me quite often, that's not the way everybody thinks about the world. So,
Yeah.
just a suggestion.
Thank you.
thank you all. I mean, it's helpful to have the opportunity, and I have friends and members of the public answering, but some of them are quite concerned.
Any other comments from the committee? Thank you very much. Any comments from the public?
It's pretty exciting to have AMATS talk about implementing the land use plan. So a great step forward. It would be wonderful if we, as the members of the public, for instance, my neighborhood is working on a neighborhood plan. It'd be great if we would have more definition about what that means. And I'm glad that you guys are discussing it internally. If we could get some idea of your work plan towards implementing the land use plan. If we look at level of service, for instance, which has been a focus for a long time, and then we read Charles Wolfort's column, yesterday, day before, he talks about where is the investment going? Is it going downtown, or is it going to different parts of Anchorage? And the comment from the Downtown Partnership was that downtown's been neglected financially for a while, and I would concur. Another option, perhaps you guys can talk about, in the land use plan, there are, reinvestment focus areas. They call them RFAs, reinvestment focus areas. And they're blobs right now. One of the blobs is downtown. Another is down there where Cook Inlet is working on Chugach Way. And then, of course, we've got Fairview. And it would be wonderful to hear reports as to how AMATS is perhaps shifting from level of service as a measure of priority into the land use plan priorities. That'd be a big thrill.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, thank you for your participation. It is 2:33 and this meeting is adjourned.